The chapel sat on the edge of Brattleboro, Vermont, where the tree line grows thick and roads thin into silence. It was a modest church, weathered stone, 4 lancet windows, and a white steeple that rarely rang anymore. Locals knew it simply as St. Olympha's, though no one could quite agree on who Olympha was, or if she'd ever lived. In the summer of 1971, the vestry had approved long overdue renovations. Water had found its way through the western wall, and frost had splintered much of the original woodwork. Blueprints were drawn by a retired architect from Montpellier, a Mr. Darnell Creed, whose name still clung to faded permits in the town hall's filing cabinets. His sketches were precise, some even lovingly annotated in fine blue ink. No additions were planned, no square footage expended, just stabilizing what was already there. When the work concluded in September, Creed signed off with a long, satisfied breath. The walls were sound, the trusses reinforced, no new rooms, no surprises. He left the church with a final roll of blueprints and a complimentary fruit basket from the parish council. And yet, by the second Sunday in October, there it was, a new room. Wedged at the end of the east hallway, past the coat hooks and beneath a glazed, sun-bleached crucifix, a door stood, solid oak, with a cloudy brass knob and no plaque. Parishioners remembered a wall there. Some recalled a set of donation boxes. But now, with complete casual certainty, a room had appeared. Its door was slightly ajar, and faint light glowed beneath the threshold. Pastor Mildred Ashcroft, a measured woman in her 60s with a voice like polished stone, was the first to speak it aloud. This wasn't here. The others murmured assent, brows drawn, lips pursed. Creed was called. He arrived with his briefcase and his blueprints. When shown the room, he turned pale. "I didn't design this. It's not on the plans." He unrolled the documents on the church office table. There, clear as daylight, was the east corridor. Blank wall, no break, no door. Creed ran his finger along the measurements, then rose, walked the hall again, and pressed his palm to the door's wood. It was warm, too warm. The children were first to suggest it was the new Sunday school room. They spoke about it matter-of-factly, as though they'd always expected it to be there. "We saw it in the drawing," one girl said, "but no one could produce such a drawing." A boy named Ezra claimed Miss Helene had told them last week they'd be in the sunroom with the soft chairs. Helene Simmons, Sunday school teacher and local librarian, denied this. "I've never seen this door before," she whispered. But that Sunday, she led them inside. There were cushions, a carpet of deep green, shelves lined with picture books, some familiar, some oddly wordless. A window framed in leaded glass admitted light, though no one could say from which angle. There were no windows on that side of the church. There never had been. Historical records from the Vermont Diocesan Archives confirmed the original chapel structure dated back to 1843. St. Olympha's had been built on the ruins of a non-denominational tabernacle that had burned in 1811. Early sketches show a square building with a small steeple and no side rooms. One curious detail emerged from these archives. A fire marshal's inspection from 1912, part of a statewide insurance assessment, recorded a detached educational annex, once situated east of the church, later condemned and removed in 1926. No photos survived, but a penciled note on the margin of the report read, "No wiring, room lit by painted glass, smell of pitch lingered." No record explained what became of the annex. Helene resumed lessons in the room the following week. She said the children seemed unusually quiet, though well-behaved. One girl, Sadie Clem, sat with her eyes closed the entire hour, mouthing something in rhythm. Another, Timmy Ward, asked if the upside-down cross was a symbol of love or a test. Helene asked what he meant. He pointed to a panel in the ceiling, though no such symbol was found there upon inspection. A week later, Timmy would stop speaking altogether. Creed visited a final time in late October. He brought a new set of blueprints, scanned, printed, annotated with ink again. The room still wasn't on them. He walked its dimensions, measured the walls, compared notes. It should not fit. The church was already pressed against its lot line on that side. But inside, the room spanned 17 feet, 7 inches wide, with perfect right angles. He measured twice, then a third time. A breeze moved across his cheek, though the room had no vent, no visible ductwork. It carried the faint scent of beeswax and something fainter. Iron, perhaps, or brackish water. That night, Creed sent a telegram to an associate in Montpellier, a retired surveyor named Lowell Drum. The message read, "Structure manifested externally WWO logical displacement. East wall anomaly. Could use your eye. Bring ground scans if possible." Drum never replied. 2 days later, his mailbox was found filled with feathers. Dozens of them. Gray, soft, no two the same. His wife reported no birds nearby. That week, the children returned to the room. This time, the lights were dimmer. The books had changed. One of them showed a child holding a candle, walking into a triangle. No title, no words. On the last page, the child looked back, eyes gone completely white. The second Sunday after the room appeared, the congregation gathered as usual, boots dripping with October rain, scarves tugged loose and steaming from the warmth inside. No one spoke of the room directly, but glances lingered eastward, toward the unmarked door. Pastor Ashcroft had instructed Helene Simmons to carry on with Sunday school, as normal, though normalcy had already bent like steam in this place. The children filed in quietly, a dozen in all, ages 6 to 10. Their footsteps patted softly on the new carpet. Helene followed last, a clutch of paper leaflets in her hands, illustrated psalms, printed from the diocesan archive printer. She paused at the doorway, unsure why her breath caught. The room felt cooler this time. She told herself the heating system must not have reached this far yet. Inside, the children took their places on the cushions. The green carpet now bore a faint pattern she hadn't noticed before, a circular motif, like braided rope or serpents eating their tails. The bookshelves had shifted, no longer centered on the rear wall. They had tucked themselves into corners, recessed in alcoves that looked as though they'd always been carved there. One boy, Milo Harris, tugged at Helene's sleeve. "The man in the glass says we don't need books today." She blinked. "What man, sweetheart?" He pointed toward the window, still lidded, still glowing with colorless light. But today, its design was different. Gone was the geometric pattern of last week. In its place stood a stylized figure, robed in black, hands outstretched, a gold disc hovering behind its head like a halo. The face was blank. No eyes, no mouth, just a smoothed plane of glass. Helene called it a trick of the light. But she did not look again. The lesson passed strangely. No one fidgeted. No one laughed. The children sat in still formation, barely blinking. She read the assigned story. Daniel in the lion's den. Halfway through, Sadie Clem raised her hand. "He didn't pray to God," she said softly. He prayed to the one behind the third door. Helene stared. I'm sorry. Sadie didn't answer. Her hand lowered. Her eyes remained open, fixed on the floor. Later that day, during coffee hour, the children behaved oddly. Not unruly, not loud, but distant. They formed a tight circle in the fellowship hall, whispering among themselves. Milo walked in counterclockwise loops around the refreshment table. Another child, Lizzie Payne, refused lemonade because the glass would remember her fingerprints. Several parents raised eyebrows but laughed it off. But Pastor Ashcroft did not laugh. She took Helene aside. What did you do in there? Only the usual, Helene insisted. They were quiet, almost too quiet. That evening, Helene found herself unable to sleep. She sat by the window in her farmhouse, the wind shaking the pane. Around midnight, she opened her lesson binder to record notes and found a drawing slipped between the pages. It was done in charcoal, crude but certain. A figure with a blank face, arms out, halo aglow. Around its feet were children, kneeling. A door floated in the air behind them, surrounded by looping symbols she didn't recognize. She didn't own charcoal. She didn't recall any child carrying art supplies. Historical context offered little comfort. In 1904, a brief article had run in the Brattleboro Reformer documenting peculiar dreams among students at a now-demolished seminary near the St. Olympha's lot. The dreams described doors, inside lightless rooms, and a teacher with no mouth. The seminary closed that winter due to a student's disappearance. No body was recovered. The school was razed. The lot remained unused until the church expanded eastward in 1925. One child, Ezra Dell, began speaking backward. His parents assumed it was a game, until a linguist cousin recognized fragments of Syriac and Old Latin in his speech. No one in the household spoke either. When asked to repeat a phrase, Ezra laughed and replied, "You wouldn't understand. Your ears don't know how to fold." Another, little Bonnie Trask, began humming in her sleep. Her mother described the tune as lopsided, like a lullaby played on a broken carousel. The family cat refused to enter Bonnie's room. One morning, her bedsheets were arranged in a perfect circle around her, and her pillow had been inverted inside the case. When pressed, Bonnie said only, "We made a promise. The first game is easy." Despite growing concern, the children insisted on returning to the room the next Sunday. They said it felt nice in there. They liked the soft green and the quiet. They liked that the room listened. One child, Will Raddick, told Helene, "When you're not looking, it gets bigger." But not for you. Helene tried to test this. She brought a tape measure. 17 feet, 7 inches, same as last week. She measured again after the children left. 19 feet, 3 inches. Then again. 17, 7. She put the tape away. Then, the most unsettling moment. Helene asked them to draw their favorite part of the story that day, Jonah and the whale. Most drew fish, boats, stormy seas, but Ezra drew a spiral, thick black lines that grew darker toward the center. At the middle, a door. Beneath it, he wrote something she couldn't read at first. Unfamiliar glyphs, drawn carefully. That night, she found them again, carved into the wall of her attic. Precisely the same. Scholars of religious iconography often debate the psychological origins of doors in spiritual architecture. Why thresholds carry weight across cultures. In Christian folklore, doors often represent a passage between the known and unknown, earth and heaven, sin and salvation. But some fringe theorists argue for a third interpretation: doors as containment, not to pass through, but to keep something in. The room remained silent through the week. No one entered, but the children spoke of it constantly, never to adults, only to each other. They whispered about the figure in the corner and the soft whisper through the rug. They began finishing each other's sentences. They walked in unison. They stared too long at closed doors. One mother, worried about changes in her daughter's sleep patterns, asked if she could attend Sunday school with her the next week. Her daughter replied, "You're not invited." The room said so. And when the next Sunday arrived, the children went in first. Always first. As if they knew the order. Helene, trembling, followed again. And again, the books had changed. Lowell Drum arrived in Brattleboro a week later than expected, his truck dusted with road salt and his expression drawn. He wore an old canvas coat and carried a steel tripod wrapped in oiled cloth. "Sorry for the delay," he muttered to Pastor Ashcroft. "Was held up in Randolph, substation sinkhole." He did not mention the feathers in his mailbox. Lowell was methodical, had been since the Corps in '58. He didn't much care for superstition, but he respected topography. He walked the church perimeter at dawn, marking distances with red surveyor flags, scribbling measurements in a pad older than he looked. He was, by trade and habit, a man of baselines. He trusted what could be drawn and redrawn. And yet, the eastern wing didn't fit. The outer wall, according to every plan, every drawing, every lived memory, ran 48 feet end to end. Measured from the inside, the corridor and adjoining rooms added up to 49 feet, 2 inches. The discrepancy should have been impossible. He ran the scan thrice, infrared, ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. The anomalous space didn't even register. On paper, it wasn't a void. It simply wasn't there. A clean absence, not interference, not miscalibration. Just absence. He printed the scans. Where the hallway should have ended, there was a narrow rectangle of unrecorded data, like the scanner refused to see that part of the wall. "I've scanned collapsed minds," he told Creed, "and those at least answer back. This is just nothing." Inside, the Sunday school room remained unchanged, save for one new detail. A small cross had been painted above the door, childlike, crooked, as if by a trembling hand. No one confessed to painting it. No brush was found. But one of the children, Milo, insisted it had always been there. Historical cartography offered a new thread. A local historian, Dr. Penelope Gray, unearthed an 1855 plat map of Brattleboro's religious district. It showed the original lot line of St. Olympha's, marked in faded ink. But more curious was the building once adjacent, a non-denominational children's mission, raised in the 1880s after a cholera outbreak. According to town ledgers, the mission was run by a Reverend L. Lamb, who kept no congregation, conducted no funerals, and collected no tithe. His only focus, it seemed, was teaching. The one surviving letter from Lamb's tenure, found in the Vermont Historical Society's off-site archive, read simply, "The smallest faith opens the oldest doors. The children understand what the elders cannot. We do not lead them. We listen." No one knew what became of Lam. His name disappeared after 1883. Drum, disquieted, conducted one final test. He left a leveling rod inside the Sunday school room overnight, its position precisely marked on the floor. When he returned the next morning, it had shifted by 3 degrees and now tilted slightly north. The marks on the floor remained in place. The object had moved, but the room had not. He packed his gear before noon and left without saying goodbye. Weeks later, Creed would find a note left under a stone on the church's outer steps, signed in Drum's careful hand. "Don't go back in. It's already adjusting for you." Inside the room, the changes became subtler. The bookshelf now held only 9 books. Always 9, though Helene couldn't recall which had vanished. They still bore no publishing marks. One seemed to be a wordless picture book with inverted shadows. Another featured a sequence of empty frames, except for a recurring silhouette standing behind a chair. The children, meanwhile, had stopped speaking in the room. They took their places, folded their hands, and sat still for the full hour. No giggling, no whispering. Just silence. Even the littlest ones, who weeks before had squirmed with attention spans like loose kites, now sat in statuesque calm. One Sunday, Helene tried something different. She left the Bible closed and asked, "Who can tell me about what we learned last week?" None answered. But Sadie reached slowly for one of the books. She opened it, revealing a single illustration. A hallway, long and gray, ending in a door with a single vertical slit in its center. Below it, scrawled in what looked like graphite pencil, was a caption. "Not all doors are meant to be opened. Some are meant to listen." Helene took the book home. That night, the pages were blank. Curiously, town maintenance workers reported the church's east-facing motion light had ceased working. Despite the bulb being replaced twice, it now clicked on unpredictably, usually between 3:07 and 3:10 a.m. One neighbor, a widower named Hollis Mavers, complained of a high-pitched ringing during those same minutes. "I thought it was tinnitus," he said, "but it's only then. Like a teacup squealing in my bones." Meanwhile, debates among the church elders turned anxious. Some suggested sealing the door. Others demanded it be opened during regular service so all could observe. But when the janitor, a young man named Patrick Thorne, attempted to prop it open midweek, the door swung shut with such force it cracked the frame. Patrick's wrist was sprained. The door bore no latch, no spring mechanism. The congregation was told it was a settling issue. As fears mounted, children grew eerily uniform. They stopped bringing toys. They no longer ran between pews. They stood in line before the Sunday school door, eyes forward, hands clasped behind their backs. Even their clothes seemed to match. Navy, gray, brown. Earth tones. No one told them to dress alike. One mother, Mary Ann Raddock, pulled her son from Sunday school after he began referring to his bed as the second threshold. He wept that night, saying, "The room will forget me." By the end of November, 2 families had quietly stopped attending St. Olympha's altogether. Dr. Gray, the historian, returned to examine the site more closely. She took clay impressions of the window's framing and discovered etchings too fine for the naked eye. Under magnification, the markings formed an archaic pattern, neither Latin nor Greek, but resembling old Church Slavonic glyphs used in liturgical apocrypha. One resembled an hourglass with its center fractured. An expert in early Christian iconography was consulted. He replied with a single sentence, "This is not language, it's containment script." And though no one could agree on what the room was, or how it came to be, the questions began to bloom like mold. Why did the blueprints never change, even when the room was real and solid? How could something so present remain unmappable, even to machines? And what, exactly, was listening on the other side of that painted glass. Snow came early that year. By the first Sunday in December, St. Olympha's stood under a quilt of white, so clean it seemed to hush the world. Congregants arrived wrapped in wool and fatigue, their boots brushing the steps like they feared waking something beneath. The east wing bore a peculiar stillness, the icicles along its eaves long and unmelting, frozen not just by weather, but by decision. Helene had stopped using her watch during lessons. She said it kept losing time in the room, skipping forward in bursts. One week, she left at what felt like noon. The church clock insisted it was still 11:06. Another week, she felt sure an hour had passed, but the hand had only moved 8 minutes. The Sunday school bell, a hand-polished brass chime affixed just above the corridor, refused to ring any more. The clapper still swung, but no sound came. Inside, the children were quiet as ever, but not blank. Their faces held a kind of alertness, not fearful, not passive, attentive, listening for something no adult could hear. More troubling still, they had begun to draw again. Helene didn't ask them to. They just began producing images from small notebooks brought from home, though she never saw the children arrive with them. The drawings varied. One child sketched concentric doors, each nested within the last. Another drew a set of hands pressed flat against glass, fingers stretching longer at the tips. Bonnie Trask's were most disturbing, overlapping spirals surrounding a chair, always a chair, placed beneath an inverted crossbeam. Helene asked her what it meant. Bonnie shrugged. That's where the first one waits. When she asked, "Waits for what?" Bonnie only said, "When the echo stops." Down in the church basement, the maintenance lights flickered for 4 nights in a row, always at 2:13 a.m. The boiler, uninspected since 2008, began making a dull, rattling noise, like beads rolling inside a wooden pipe. Patrick, the janitor, descended with a flashlight and returned pale. He reported nothing broken, just an odd metallic smell, like heated pennies, near the ductwork leading eastward. But the most troubling anomaly came by accident. A young seminarian, Jonah Carr, was photographing the church's nave for a parish newsletter. He took wide shots of the altar, the side aisles, and, without thinking, one of the eastern hallway. In the photograph, the door to the Sunday school room was visible. The light was on inside, but where the room should have been visible through the open door, there was only blackness, not shadow, not underexposure. A perfect rectangular void, bordered by doorframe and floor tile, flat and textureless, as if someone had carved a hole into the image. He tried again. Another photo. Same result. Out of curiosity, he photographed the same hallway, using the mirror mounted above the sanctuary's east entry. From the mirrored angle, the hallway was visible. Plain, ordinary. But the Sunday school room had no door, just blank wall. 2 images, 2 truths, both developed in a darkroom, both certified untouched. The next Sunday, Jonah stayed after service to question Helene. He asked to observe the children during their hour. She declined. They get different when adults watch. Do they talk about the room outside of church? He asked. She hesitated. They talk to the room. Helene hadn't meant to say that aloud. Jonah returned later that week with 2 more photographs, one taken of the church's exterior from the parking lot, the east wing clearly present, stonework intact. The second, taken from the mirror of a parked van, no east wing at all. The building ended clean at the transept, as if the entire wing, room and all, simply didn't exist in reflection. Jonah showed the photographs to Pastor Ashcroft, who locked them in the file drawer behind her desk. "The room is symbolic," she explained to no one in particular. "The building contains many thresholds. This is just one more, an invitation to consider faith." She began refusing questions about it. She declined to let the diocese send an inspector. "It's a private parish matter," she wrote, but the children continued to change. During communion one Sunday, little Ezra Dell reached up and brushed his fingers across the brass rail. "The metal has static," he whispered. "It's not shielding us anymore." Two other children began blinking in unison. Not a game, just synchronized, rhythmic fluttering. When asked why, Sadie replied, "It makes the man in the glass feel calm." One child stopped blinking altogether. His eyes grew dry, red-rimmed, but he refused eye drops. He said they would blur the third layer. Historical theologians often note the Christian fascination with mirrors, especially in apocryphal writings. The Acts of Thomas describes mirrors as waters that remember, a surface through which truth can be seen, distorted, or lost. In early Eastern sects, mirrors were sometimes buried beneath altars to capture prayers or ward off doublings of spirit. One obscure manuscript in the British Library, labeled Codex Rourke, speaks of the door that refuses reflection, believed by some to be a metaphor for apostasy. But its accompanying illustrations, doorways that float above a black floor, children kneeling before them, have led fringe theologians to propose a more literal interpretation. No scholar has been able to explain why one of the manuscript's margins bears the phrase, "The echo is not yours to hold." The children of St. Olympus began ending their prayers with unfamiliar phrasing. Instead of "Amen," they whispered something phonetically similar but grammatically alien. Helene recorded the sound. A linguist described it as a glottal construction not present in any known Indo-European language, as if the word folded inward on itself. When she asked the children where they learned it, they shrugged. "We didn't learn it. We remembered it." One girl, Annie Mercer, stood during snack time and recited an entire passage of Scripture, one that did not exist in any known Bible. Its rhythm was correct, its cadence familiar, but the words spoke of doors that float between shadows and the ones who knock backwards. Helene began waking at night to sounds of pages turning, though her home remained empty. Once she swore she saw a handprint on her bathroom mirror that didn't match hers. Long fingers, no palm, and then, on the second Sunday of Advent, the room changed again. No one spoke of it, but everyone felt it. The carpet had darkened by a shade. The light from the leaded window had grown colder, tinged with a faint greenish cast. The bookshelf now held only 8 books, and on the wall behind the cushions, a faint impression had formed, like something pressing outward from behind the plaster. Not a shape, exactly. A pressure, as if the room was beginning to remember something it had forgotten to contain. No one admitted to noticing it at first. It was Milo who pointed out the absence, casually, as if noting the weather. "There used to be 9, he said, running his hand along the low shelf. "Now there are 8, but the empty one's still reading." Helene checked the shelf. He was right. 8 books remained, each bound in cracked cloth, their spines unmarked. The 9th space bore no dust, no gap, but the children left it untouched. Milo even adjusted the book slightly to give the phantom volume its room. None of the children questioned this. They just accepted. "You said it's still reading?" Helene asked. Milo nodded, eyes distant. "It opens on its own when we aren't looking." She asked what it read. His answer, "Us." By now, the room had assumed a rhythm. Sunday mornings unfolded with clockwork stillness. The children entered, sat, waited. The books opened, sometimes of their own accord. Occasionally, one child would stand, walk to the window, place a hand on the glass, then return. No one was instructed. No one led. And still, no parent ever joined them inside. Creed asked Helene gently why she never brought another adult into the room. "I have," she said once, "twice. And they weren't permitted to see." When pressed, she couldn't explain further. Only that when other adults tried to enter, the room seemed ordinary. Furniture slightly displaced, children agitated, the sense of presence, of something watching from the far edges, absent. It was as though the room only unveiled itself to the right frequency. Children, the rare, attuned adult. Perhaps only Helene. An unresolved question in ecclesiastical history comes from the 13th century Noticia Malachi, a disputed text discovered in fragments beneath a chapel floor in Toledo, Spain. It references the hollow doctrine, a teaching that the youngest minds alone can host divine geometries. Where adults perceive silence, it reads, children perceive syllables curled like smoke. Most scholars consider it poetic fiction, but in Brattleboro, syllables had returned. Sadie had begun humming a single 5-note melody each time she touched the wall beneath the window. Always the same pitch, the same intervals. Dr. Gray recorded it and ran the sequence through a spectrum analyzer. The waveform was simple, almost unnervingly so, like a lullaby buried under centuries. But there was something else. At the end of each recording, barely audible, perhaps imagined, came a 6th tone. Lower, off-scale, like a breath drawn from beneath the foundation. Outside the church, things continued to rot. The street lamp facing the eastern wall no longer lit. A second one, 2 blocks north, began flickering in a pattern that matched Sadie's song. A stray dog was found staring at the wall for 6 consecutive hours, its ears twitching in time with something silent. People began reporting dreams. Only dreams, they said, but all with a common shape. Each began in a hallway, narrow, timeless, with doors on either side. The doors bore no knobs, only small glass panes like slitted pupils. And at the end of the hall, always, a door slightly ajar, leaking the sound of children laughing backward. Reverend Ashcroft had one such dream herself. In it, she reached the final door, opened it, and saw only an empty chair. "I couldn't enter," she said later. "I couldn't even breathe near it. I felt like I'd be overwritten." The dream remained with her for days. Her sermons grew quieter, uncertain, veering into metaphors about faith being less a path, more a memory choosing to be walked. That Sunday, she did not mention the children's room at all, not even when a young boy left service early and was found sitting outside the door, face pressed to the wood. When asked what he was doing, he replied, "Listening for my name." Inside, the room's light had shifted again, not brighter or dimmer, deeper. The colors no longer obeyed sunlight. It was as if illumination now came from the books themselves. Bonnie, always the quietest, approached Helene mid-lesson and asked, "Do you know the verse about the folding?" "What folding?" Helene asked. "The one that makes people double, the one that turns a room into a pocket." Bonnie drew a symbol in the dust behind the radiator, a perfect rectangle folded twice, inward, like an envelope. Beneath it, she wrote, "He unbuilds us from behind." The writing was erased by the next morning. From the Vermont archives, Dr. Gray retrieved a 1904 account from a Lutheran seminary in Middlebury that told of a boy who described seeing the mirror underneath the world. His drawings bore strange resemblance to those from the Sunday school room: doors within doors, spirals around chairs, hollow figures pressed behind false windows. The boy, unnamed, disappeared during a winter storm. The seminary closed the following year. A curious note from the account: all clocks in the seminary stopped at 3:03 a.m. the night he vanished. At St. Olympha's, the same timestamp began to reappear. Jonah Carr, watching from the bell tower one early morning, noted that the motion light facing the east wall now lit for exactly 22 seconds, beginning at 3:03:11 each night. 22 seconds. Then darkness. He watched this cycle for 3 nights. On the 4th, the light did not come on, but his phone, even in airplane mode, buzzed. A voicemail with no number. He played it twice before deleting it. Each time, the sound was the same. Paper turning. Then a child whispering a name that wasn't his. Helene began waking with traces of chalk dust on her fingers, though she had not touched the blackboard. Once, she found a single page from one of the room's books on her pillow. It bore a phrase in Old English script: "To fold the world, draw the echo from the wall." She burned the page in her kitchen sink. The children no longer addressed her as Miss Helene. They said teacher, with emphasis on the second syllable, almost reverent. One morning, she greeted them with her usual, "Good morning, class," and Milo replied, "Good morning, Candle." She laughed. Candle? But he just smiled and said nothing more. That day, the 8th book vanished. Now only 7 remained, but the shelf still held 8. Snow kept falling, but the eastern wing no longer grew cold. The children no longer wore coats into the Sunday school room. They arrived in silence, one after another, their breath not steaming, their cheeks untouched by wind. Outside, wind chill pressed toward 0. Inside, warmth pooled unnaturally. The heating register beneath the leaded window had stopped working in November. No maintenance record could explain the ambient heat that clung to the corners of the room like something exhaled. Pastor Ashcroft walked the hallway on Christmas Eve, a candle in hand for the midnight service, and paused before the door. She did not open it. She didn't have to. Her breath hitched. Something in the air, not scent, not temperature, was wrong. Like a room remembering her before she arrived. The candles in the nave burned low that night, their wax shrinking as if drawn inward. No flame flickered. The congregation sang, but the acoustics deadened oddly near the eastern transept. Choir notes struck the air and fell, muffled before reaching the rear pews. It was as if some hidden architecture now redirected sound. On the morning of the feast of St. Stephen, Helene arrived early. She found something new. On the far wall, beneath the window, where Bonnie had once traced the rectangle in dust, a single word had appeared. Written in soft script, impossible to tell whether scratched into the plaster or rising from beneath it. Thaniel. No child claimed responsibility. None reacted with surprise. "Who is Thaniel?" Helene asked gently. "He's the chair," said Ezra. "The one who listens," added Sadie. Bonnie simply smiled, almost proudly. "He was here first." No records of Thaniel exist in any theological index. No canonized saint bears the name, though some scholars point to a rare variation of Nathaniel found in certain apocryphal scrolls from the early Alexandrian church. In these, Thaniel is not a man, but a watcher, an angelic observer, hidden among thresholds, who drink silence from the mouths of liars. The authenticity of these scrolls is debated. The Vatican denies their significance, but the children of St. Olymphas began referring to Thaniel with increasing familiarity. They no longer prayed aloud. They murmured, whispered, faced the wall, palms open. One morning, Ezra stood facing the far corner for 47 uninterrupted minutes. When Helene asked what he was doing, he said, "I'm remembering something Thaniel hasn't told me yet." The room's behavior grew stranger. The window, once letting in a pale eastern light, now seemed not to transmit sunlight at all. On cloudless mornings, when the sun should have cast a beam across the bookshelf, the glass remained dull. No matter the hour, the light from within stayed the same, dim, green-tinged, like illumination filtered through pond water. Helene pressed her hand to the glass. It was warm, not with heat, with presence. Meanwhile, the drawings multiplied. Children pulled pages from their hidden sketchbooks and folded them into corners, placed them beneath cushions, slid them behind the bookshelf. Helene found over 24, some in charcoal, some in graphite, a few in a deep reddish pigment she suspected was berry juice, but couldn't be sure. Nearly all contained one image, a chair placed in the center of a narrow room, the walls warped as if breathing inward. Above the chair, a window with no outside, and in the corner, always the same dark silhouette, armless, head tilted. One sketch was different, folded precisely into fourths and hidden inside the cover of one of the 7 remaining books. It showed Helene, drawn in stunning detail, standing by the bookshelf, head lowered as if listening to the floor. She did not recall ever assuming that pose. She destroyed the drawing in the church furnace. Dr. Gray, still searching for historical precedent, consulted the obscure 17th century mystic text Numa Fulsum, a treatise denounced as heretical for its suggestion that some rooms are born of spiritual misalignment rather than constructed by human hands. In Chapter 7, the author describes wombs in stone that host presences confused about their nature, drawn to repetition, ritual, and the pliable minds of children. The text references threshold names, words that appear only when enough minds believe in them. These names are not taught, but inferred, and once spoken aloud, the room becomes aware. Helene did not speak the word on the wall, but she did not stop the children from doing so. At least 3 began to refer to the room itself as Thaniel's ear. When asked what that meant, Bonnie replied, "He's not listening to us. He's listening through us." That winter, Milo's father was hospitalized for chest pains. Milo began drawing hearts, not cartoon hearts, but anatomical ones, cross-sectioned, spiraled open, always surrounded by small chairs, one with chains. Helene asked what the chains were for. "To hold the beat in," he replied. On the last Sunday in January, an organ note sustained for over 5 minutes during closing hymn. No one was at the keys. The sound was low, not unpleasant, but it made the glass tremble. No one spoke of it afterward. Another child, Rose, stopped speaking altogether. She only wrote phrases in tiny notebooks. There is no breath in the wall, but there are lungs. The book that reads me doesn't blink. Miss Helene is learning the word behind her name. That final phrase unsettled Helene most, for she had indeed begun dreaming again, But the dreams were not hers. They belonged to the room. She saw the walls as if from above. She watched children file in from a door that slid, not opened. She saw a shadowed figure seated in the chair, unmoving. At the end of the dream, she felt herself pressed to the plaster, watching from within. The last child to leave that Sunday turned to her and said, unprompted, "You looked out from him today." "How do you mean?" Helene whispered. "You were in Thaniel's seat." She locked the door behind them and ran her hands over the wall. The name was fading. Where it had once been clear, now it blurred at the edges, as if smudged from beneath. Still readable, but only if you expected it. That evening, Helene requested the architectural blueprints from the diocese archives again. They arrived, brittle from decades of storage. Once again, the eastern hallway showed no room, no outline, no anomaly. But this time, beneath the faded ink, a faint impression, barely visible under angled light. A single word, pressed into the parchment from behind. Thaniel. By early February, the children began arriving earlier than Helene. She would unlock the front doors at 8 a.m., only to find small footprints already melting into the floor mats. The sanctuary remained empty. The narthex, silent. But the Sunday school room's lights, though on no timer, were always dimly glowing. One morning, Helene asked Sadie how she and the others got in. Sadie tilted her head, confused. "You open the door every time. We wait for the knock." "I don't knock," Helene said. Sadie only blinked. "But you always do." In 1971, a folklorist named Carl Mencken documented a cluster of anomalous rooms reported in parish buildings across New England. His privately circulated monograph, Chambers of Instruction, recorded 12 such accounts, each describing a space unaccounted for in original designs, typically involving children, forgotten hymns, and forms of light that did not cast shadow. Though widely dismissed, one recurring detail echoed across his pages: an altar with no cross. In February, St. Olympha's Sunday school room changed again. The bookshelf was gone. In its place stood a narrow dais, no higher than a stair step. Above it, a square recess had formed in the wall, lined in white stone that none of the staff recognized. The children called it the hollow altar. They approached it differently than the bookshelf, more reverently. They stood in silence before it, sometimes for entire sessions, hands clasped. Occasionally, one child would step up onto the dais and whisper a line of scripture. But never a verse Helene had taught. The phrases were biblical in cadence, yet wrong, off by syntax, like apocryphal riddles. He drew the line beneath our breath. From the east, he whispers west. Let the echo praise him backwards. Dr. Gray reviewed the church's security footage, hoping to see what had become of the shelf and books. But the camera's feed for the eastern hallway looped back each night between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. in a tight 33-second sequence. A bug, perhaps, or something else. He showed the clip to a contact at the Vermont School of Theology. The man watched it 3 times, then muttered, "It's breathing in loop." Indeed, the flickering grain of the footage showed a barely perceptible rhythm, frames pulsing in and out as though the camera were watching from inside something with lungs. Helene stopped reviewing the tapes. Instead, she recorded audio each Sunday morning. 6 sessions passed without incident. Hums, small laughter, faint shuffles. On the 7th, the recording caught a whisper just after the children had left. It spoke one word: return. She played the clip for Pastor Ashcroft. The pastor nodded solemnly, said nothing. But that evening she sent an email to the bishopric requesting temporary suspension of all youth programs pending investigation. The request was denied. 2 nights later, Reverend Ashcroft was found outside the eastern transept, her hands pressed flat to the cold stone, face streaked with tears. "I saw it," she whispered, again and again. "What?" Helene asked, helping her up. "The altar from the inside. I was behind it." From that day, she ceased attending Sunday services. The pulpit was left to rotating deacons. The children, however, remained unaffected, perhaps even more attuned. They began to refer to themselves collectively as the listeners. "Why that name?" Helene asked Bonnie. "Because we don't speak the echo," she replied. "We let it move through." Soon, they developed a kind of liturgy. It was never spoken aloud as a group, yet each child seemed to know when to stand, when to kneel, when to face the corner beside the hollow altar. It changed weekly, yet was always synchronized. A ritual with no rehearsal. Dr. Gray made note of these movements, comparing them against known liturgical cycles. None matched. But a 1910 Russian Orthodox catechism contained a curious footnote regarding early mystic sects in Crimea, who believed that worship, properly tuned, could unlock the folded face of the world. These groups disappeared without record, but illustrations from the time depict children encircling a blank square altar. Helene began dreaming in static. Not the sound, but the texture, the feeling of static beneath her skin, behind her eyes. Each dream ended the same way, with her standing before the hollow altar, pressing her face to the stone recess, and seeing her reflection almost blink out of rhythm. She stopped sleeping in her own bed. One morning, Milo handed her a folded page from his notebook. It contained a single sentence in blocky capitals. "Thaniel taught us to listen by not listening first." That week, the 6th book disappeared. There were no sounds, no thud, no child noticed. But the shelf, now partly reappeared on the room's far wall, held 5 physical books and one hollow space that shimmered faintly in certain light, as if a book still tried to be there. Helene sat before it one afternoon. She reached forward and, against her better judgment, touched the hollow. Her fingers passed through the shape of a book that was not there, and she heard, not with her ears, but in the bones of her hand, a slow turning of pages. She wept, without knowing why. Later, she asked Ezra what he heard in the hollow. He looked at her blankly. "You heard it?" he asked. "Yes." He smiled faintly. "Then you're almost done learning your word." That night, she pulled every Bible from her shelf at home, flipping page after page, searching for Thaniel. She never found the name, but she found a peculiar passage in an old Douay-Rheims translation, marginalia in pencil, nearly erased. Beside Psalm 77:2, someone had written, "The parable is folded, not to conceal, but to house him." She turned the page. A hairline crease ran through the center of the paper. Not torn, folded. Once, as if someone had prepared the book to become something else. By the first week of March, the temperature in the eastern hallway no longer changed with the weather. No frost gathered at the windows. No wind seeped in through the eaves. The church's maintenance log showed the boiler system servicing every room except the Sunday school wing. Yet when Helene stepped inside, the warmth wrapped around her, not as air, but as intention. Something wanted her to be comfortable. The hollow altar had begun to change again. Helene noticed it first during a storm, when snow pelted the stained glass above, and shadows moved strangely across the walls. The stone recess no longer lay flat. It curved inward, as if the plaster had softened, bowed. Light behaved oddly near its lip, bending, dimming, resisting exit. And then, one Sunday, the 7th book returned. No one saw it arrive. No child claimed to have touched it. Yet there it was, placed neatly on the shelf, spine cracked, pages parted to the center, as if something had exhaled into its middle. No title on the cover, no markings on the spine. When Helene reached for it, the children stared, not with alarm, but with waiting. She opened the cover. Blank. She turned a page, still blank, until the 3rd. There, in the center, was a single inked phrase in narrow script. Behold, the word before breath. She read it aloud before she could stop herself. The children stood, all at once, in silence, and then, as if choreographed by memory, they began to speak. It was not a prayer, not a chant. It was a recounting. Each child, one by one, described a moment Helene did not remember but could not deny. Bonnie spoke of the first time the room opened with no door. Ezra spoke of Helene crying beside the bookshelf. Sadie spoke of her own dream, a spiral staircase beneath the altar and Helene's voice calling downward. And Milo, who had not spoken in days, said only, "You gave us the last key when you wept." She asked him what key, but he did not repeat himself. That night, she stayed after dark, alone, seated beside the returned book. The pages turned without her hand, not with wind, but with deliberation. Each page revealed no text, only faint impressions, like echoes of writing, as if a message had been scrubbed away but left its weight behind. She held a candle close, and the flame bent toward the page. The next morning, Pastor Ashcroft left a single sheet on Helene's desk. No note, just a Xeroxed image from the 1928 diocesan records. It showed a floor plan drafted by a surveyor named M.C. Ellings in 1925, 3 years before construction began. The eastern wall was solid, but in the lower margin, written faintly in the surveyor's own hand, "There is space, but not for men." No one knows why Ellings wrote it. He died that winter in a house fire outside Barra, Vermont. His estate was never catalogued, but his records, collected posthumously by the diocesan committee, included a hand-drawn symbol that recurred across the margins of his sketches, a narrow chair, seen from above, with 7 circles arcing around it. Dr. Gray found the same symbol once before. It appeared in a footnote of the Pneuma Falsum, associated with threshold objects, structures that occupy suggestive space, called into being not by brick and timber, but by the minds that believe they should exist. Not hallucinations, not metaphor, suggestions turned architectural. The children, in other words, had believed the room into reality. Or worse, remembered it. For Helene, the returned book became a point of gravity. She began to hear it during the night, not audibly, but internally, like a sensation of presence waiting just beyond the veil of wakefulness. She began to miss the room, even when in it. One evening, after a storm swept through and briefly knocked out the power, she lit a candle and sat by the book. And for the first time, she asked aloud, "What do you want from me?" The candle bent sideways, not flickered, bent. She placed her hand to the open book, and something pressed back. Not flesh, not movement, just acknowledgement. The next morning, every child arrived with a slip of paper in their pocket, folded into quarters. When Helene asked what they were, they answered in unison. "Our name," they said. Each paper bore one word, different for each child. None were standard names. Among them, Elidon, Nithra, Locke, Sereth, Viun. When she asked what the names meant, Ezra smiled and said, "They're ours now, because we gave them away before." That Sunday, the room was too bright. Not sunlight. There was none. But brightness from nowhere. The kind of brightness that builds behind your eyes when you're about to cry. Helene stepped onto the dais for the first time. The hollow altar curved inward, now deeper than her arm could reach. And at the far back of the recess, barely visible, something was moving. Not crawling, not retreating, breathing. She stepped down. Bonnie touched her hand and whispered, "You don't have to go in yet." Yet. Not until we're all ready. Then she handed Helene something small, a folded page, drawn in charcoal, heavy strokes. It showed Helene standing alone in the room, while the walls unfolded around her like flower petals in reverse. In the corner, as always, the chair. Empty. Until the next breath. By mid-March, the air in the room began to thin, not in volume, but in feeling, as if a part of the world's atmosphere had withdrawn its permission to feel known. Helene began walking the church corridors at night, not out of fear, but necessity. The sanctuary no longer comforted. The nave stood silent, brittle with disuse, but the hallway to the east pulsed with something like welcome. One night, at precisely 2:13 a.m., she found the Sunday school door open. No wind, no damage, just ajar, as though someone had stepped in and forgotten to close it behind them. Inside, the children's chairs had been rearranged, 7 of them in a tight circle around the dais, each with a slip of paper on its seat. Each slip bore a line from Scripture, but altered. "He that hath ears, let him borrow. In the beginning was the echo. The silence comprehendeth it not." No child had been in the room that day. She had sent them home early, citing illness. She sat in the center chair. The light above her flickered, not as if struggling, but signaling. And the air shifted again. Some part of her, old and private, flinched. That night, she dreamed of a man with no face, not absent, smoothed. His features existed only in implication, folds where a mouth might be, indentations for eyes, a gesture of presence rather than presence itself. He stood behind the altar, framed by the curved recess. She asked, "Are you Thaniel?" He nodded, then tilted his head. Not yes, not no. He pointed upward, and she awoke in her chair. Hours had passed, the candle had melted down, and on the floor before her, the 7th book. It had moved, no longer on the shelf, now laid flat, open to a blank page save one addition, a fingerprint, seared like ash, pressed into the center. Her own. Helene stopped asking questions out loud. Instead, she began transcribing. Each morning she returned to the room and found a new fragment, scrawled in her own handwriting, though she never recalled writing them. The fold is not a hiding place. It is a mercy. The room was not made for us. We are made for the room. He waits in the mirror that casts no self. Dr. Gray returned that week with an academic paper, privately circulated, detailing a series of cognitive synchrony events observed in a failed monastery experiment outside Innsbruck in 1932. The monks reported shared dreams of a figure known as the absent ordainer, whose face could not be remembered. When shown sketches post facto, each monk drew the same impossibly vague countenance, just like the children, just like Helene. The phenomenon was theorized as a group psychogenic fugue, but the author added a note of caution. Collective forgetting is not always a malfunction. It may be the required price for encountering a memory, too. too large. Helene did not sleep that night. She walked the entire church, candle in hand, and stopped at the sanctuary. The pulpit stood untouched, but the cross behind it, massive, old, hand-carved, now bore a small crack down its center, barely visible, but humming. When she touched it, the sound stopped, and in its place, silence so complete it pressed against her ribs. She staggered back. Something was folding the church inward, not in space, but in remembrance. She returned to the classroom, found the children waiting. None had knocked. All were silent. Ezra gestured for her to sit. Bonnie took her hand. Sadie closed her eyes. And Milo, trembling now, said the first spontaneous sentence she'd heard from him in weeks. "We have to forget you to finish." "What?" Helene asked. He shook his head, crying. "It's how you get through. You can't be remembered. Not yet." Dr. Gray, now desperate for clarity, turned to the writings of a little-known 18th-century mystic named Abel Quince, who wrote in the tuning psalms, "Each soul bears a shadow library, shelved with books unread, unspoken, unwritten, yet known." When the light turns backwards, these volumes can be exhaled into place. It was his theory that forgotten sanctuaries grow from internal architecture, a kind of spiritual autogenesis, a room that wants to be found, seated inside those receptive to unspoken geometry. Helene read that passage again and again. She began to wonder if she had been chosen, or if the room had always been hers, and she was only now waking up inside it. The children stopped referring to the room as Sunday school. They now called it the first room. When asked why, Ezra replied, "Because it was here before we were born. Before anyone was born." Helene, heart pounding, asked what came after the first room. Bonnie looked away. Sadie muttered, "The narrowing." No one explained further. On the final Sunday of March, the room was empty when Helene arrived, but on each chair sat a folded page, 7 pages total. Each bore a drawing of her face, but subtly wrong, the eyes too distant, the mouth half erased, a face in transition. On the altar's dais, the book lay open. On its center page, a handprint, child-sized. Beneath it, one word, "Now." And for the first time, Helene stepped into the recess. It was deeper than it looked. The walls were soft, not to the touch, but to the memory, as if space had learned how to forget being a wall. The light bent around her. The breath in her chest stilled. And behind her, for just 1 second, she felt the chair occupied. The following morning, no one unlocked the door. The church stood silent, unentered. Pastor Ashcroft was found seated in his car, staring at nothing, keys in hand, unmoving. When approached, he only said, "I didn't know it was Tuesday." Inside, the Sunday school room was unchanged, but the air had collapsed in on itself. Dust hovered mid-motion. Papers lay perfectly still, though no window was open. Every clock in the building had stopped at 6:07 a.m. Helene was gone, not missing, not fled. Gone. Her coat remained, draped neatly over her chair. Her copy of the children's roll sat on the desk, open to the first page. 7 names, but her keyring was bent, not broken, bent as though by heat or immense pressure. Its metal curled in on itself, now a spiral. Dr. Gray arrived that afternoon, summoned by Pastor Ashcroft's trembling voicemail. "She's in the fold, isn't she? You knew. You knew." What remained in the classroom was not evidence, but resonance. The children, all of them, had not shown up that day, nor any day since. Their homes were undisturbed, beds made, breakfast bowls empty in the sink. The local police issued no Amber Alert, because, as far as the town registry was concerned, The children had never been enrolled. Their birth records had vanished, not erased, disestablished, as if they had been permitted to exist only for the duration of that room's remembering. And now the room no longer remembered. Dr. Gray sat in Helene's chair, running his fingers over the pages of the 7th book, which remained cool to the touch. When he opened to the last page, he found a series of inked symbols, 7 spirals, one folding into the next. Beneath them, a line in Helene's hand. I am sitting in the chair. I am reading the book. I am hearing the words again. Gray held his breath and leaned toward the altar. The recess was gone. In its place, a flat wall, sealed smooth. Yet when he placed his hand against it, the plaster breathed inward. He did not recoil. Instead, he pressed, and the surface bowed, not cracking, not breaking, simply yielding. He whispered, "Threshold object." From beneath the dais came a sound, not a voice, but language nonetheless, a hum, rhythmic and wet. He leaned closer and saw the seam, thin as a thread, a hairline division spiraling from the base of the altar, downward, a suggestion of a staircase, carved not into stone, but into reception. The spiral turned the wrong way. Counterclockwise. He hesitated, stepped down, and as his foot touched the first stair, the light in the room dimmed, not from absence, but from focus, as if the room now watched only him. Each step down folded the world smaller. Ceiling curved in, walls dropped into shadow, and somewhere ahead, the breath of the room grew slower, like lungs learning to rest. He descended 7 steps. At the base, a door, not built, but drawn. Charcoal lines on plaster, shaking with potential. He raised his hand, touched it. The line of the door peeled back, not open, undone. The scent was familiar, burned paper, oil, and snow. Inside, not a chamber, not a crypt, but a mirror, massive floor to ceiling. Yet when he looked in, no reflection, only Helene. She sat in the chair, reading. Her mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Behind her, the 7 children sat in a circle, backs to the mirror. And around them, books, piled high, towering even, all of them blank, save one, the 7th book on Helene's lap. As he watched, she looked up, met his eyes, did not blink, and slowly mouthed, "You're late." Then the mirror cracked, just once, a single fracture, like a whisper across glass. The room folded inward, and he fell back into the spiral. Waking in the chair, the book closed, the room silent. Outside, the clocks had resumed, but inside, time held its breath, and the chair was empty. Again. The church remains, a structure of cedar and stone, its foundation older than permits suggest. Sunday services resumed, sermons preached, hymns sung. But no children walk that eastern hallway. No lessons echo from behind that door. Helene's name was never added to the memorial plaques, because there was no obituary, no incident, only a note in the personnel ledger. Position vacated, cause unknown. Some nights, janitors hear a soft humming near the eastern wall. Faint impressions of small footprints have been found in the dust, circling an area where no furniture has stood in years. The 7th book is gone, not removed, relocated, into memory, into the quiet hum beneath words not spoken. The chair remains in the attic now, locked away. Yet when visitors pass beneath the rafters, some swear they feel a weight above them, like a gaze that forgets how to close. The children's names are not remembered, not because they were lost, but because they were offered, and in that offering something was built, or returned, or recalled. Scholars debate the event in hushed corners of fringe journals. They argue over terms, psychic architecture, liminal recursion, spatial hauntology. But the truth lies elsewhere. Not in theory, not in evidence, but in the breath between pages and the spiral behind the eye. The room was never built. It was remembered. And memory, in its oldest form, does not obey direction. It loops, it folds, it waits. For the next child to draw a chair. For the next teacher to forget what the blueprints never said. And for the story to unfold again. As it always has. As it always will.